The late sun of an Arizona evening spilled across the horizon, turning the river into a ribbon of fire. Its water moved with a calm strength, winding through cottonwoods and mesquite, carrying the scent of dust and sage. In that stillness, only the cry of a hawk above and the steady rhythm of the current disturbed the silence. Yet, under that quiet, something stirred, something about to test both fate and courage. Near the river's bend, where the current pulled stronger, a young Apache warrior rode slowly along the bank. His dark horse moved with patient strides, hooves sinking into the sandy edge. The warrior's eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the land not only for game, but for signs of change. His people had long learned that danger never announced itself with noise. It came quietly, hidden in shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. And so, even here by the river, where he had often stopped for water, senses remained alert. It was then that he noticed movement in the water. At first, he thought it was a deer crossing, the flash of pale shape between ripples. But as the seconds passed, he saw arms breaking the surface, flailing in panic. A voice carried faintly across the current, choked by water and fear. A young woman, caught in the river's pull, was fighting for breath. Her white dress clung to her body like a shroud, heavy with the weight of the water, pulling her deeper each time she tried to rise. The warrior did not pause to think. His people had always honored life, whether friend or stranger, and the river was not to be trusted. Kicking his horse forward, he leaped into the current, the cold water biting at his skin. The river pulled hard, trying to drag both him and the woman downstream, but he fought against it with powerful strokes. He reached her just as her strength failed, her body going limp beneath the surface. With one arm, he pulled her up, holding her against his chest as he battled the current with the other. Every breath burned in his lungs. The river tugged at them, twisting and swirling with hidden rocks beneath. For a moment it felt as though the current might win, but the warrior refused to surrender. He forced his way toward the shallows, step by step, until his feet found ground. At last, he dragged her onto the bank, laying her on the sand as she gasped for air. Water streamed from her hair, her lips pale, her hands trembling as she clung to life. He knelt beside her, brushing her wet hair from her face. She was young, her features unfamiliar, not from his people. Her clothing spoke of settlers, those who had come with wagons and fences, seeking land where his ancestors had hunted for generations. Yet here she was, alone and nearly taken by the river. Her wide eyes met his, filled with confusion and fear. But also something unspoken, a question of why he had risked himself to save her. The warrior said nothing at first. Words were not always needed. He only waited until her breathing steadied, until the color returned to her cheeks. Then, with a calm voice, he asked how she had come to be in the river. She shook her head, her voice too broken by shock to answer clearly. All he could gather was that she had slipped while gathering water, swept away before she could cry for help. As the last of the sun dipped below the hills, shadows lengthened across the land. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the distant sound of a coyote's call. The warrior knew night in these lands was unforgiving. He could not leave her here, soaked and shaken, with no fire or shelter. He helped her to her feet, though she swayed unsteadily, and guided her toward his horse. She hesitated, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But she placed her trust in him, climbing onto the saddle with his steadying hand. Together they rode slowly along the river's edge, the land stretching wide and endless before them. The young woman clung lightly to the horse's mane, her silence broken only by the sound of her breathing. The warrior's mind, however, was far from quiet. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, and why she had been so far from any settlement. His people rarely crossed paths with settlers without reason, and when they did, it often led to conflict. Yet here he was, carrying one across the desert night, bound by honor to protect her. The moon began its climb, casting silver light over the land. The cottonwoods became dark sentinels along the river, and the horse's steady steps echoed softly against the earth. The warrior glanced at the woman more than once, noticing how exhaustion weighed on her. Her eyes closed at times, though she forced herself awake, as if fearful of what awaited when sleep claimed her. It was not long before she whispered faint words, thanking him for saving her life. Her voice carried both gratitude and sorrow, as though she knew the river was not the only danger she faced. He listened quietly, giving no reply, though her words settled deeply within him. Hours passed, and the land grew more still. Yet the warrior's instincts prickled. He could feel it something beyond the quiet, something hidden. The desert had a way of speaking to those who paid attention. The horse's ears twitched, uneasy. The river, though calmer here, seemed to whisper warnings in its ceaseless song. Then, as they rounded a bend in the trail, he noticed a faint glow in the distance. Firelight at first. He thought it might belong to her people, a camp where she could return safely. But the flicker of that flame, steady and deliberate, told him otherwise. It was not the fire of a family resting after a long day. It was a signal, placed where eyes could see from afar. The young woman stiffened as she too saw the light. Her grip on the horse tightened, and her breath quickened. She turned her head away, as if trying to hide her fear, but the warrior caught it. He knew then that whatever awaited ahead was no simple campfire. The river had nearly taken her life. But what stood beyond that glow in the desert night might prove to be even more dangerous. He slowed his horse, the air thick with tension. Questions pressed against his mind, but silence held stronger. Beside him, the young woman finally found her voice, trembling as she spoke. She told him they should not go further, that the fire did not belong to her people. Her words broke the stillness, like a stone thrown into water, sending ripples of unease through the night. The warrior looked ahead once more, his hand instinctively resting near the handle of his weapon. The land around them had fallen too quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. He could not yet see the figures near that flame, but he knew they were there, waiting. What he did not yet know was that rescuing the young woman from the river had bound his path to hers in ways neither could have foreseen. What awaited them in the shadows of that fire was not merely danger, but a turning point that would change the course of both their lives forever. The horse shifted, restless beneath him. The woman whispered his name, though he had not given it. Her voice shook, her fear laid bare. And still the firelight burned ahead, steady against the dark. Daring them to come closer, the warrior drew in a slow breath, the weight of the night pressing against his chest. He had faced the fury of the river and pulled life from its grasp. Yet, as he gazed into the uncertain glow before them, he could not shake the feeling that the true test had only just begun. The horses. Steps slowed as the warrior guided it toward a patch of shadow beneath the cottonwoods. He dismounted first, his boots pressing into the soft earth, then helped the young woman down from the saddle. Her legs were weak, trembling not only from exhaustion but from fear of what she had seen in the distance. The glow of that fire, faint though it was, seemed to weigh heavily on her spirit. She tried to speak again, her voice low, carrying words as fragile as dry leaves in the wind. She told him the fire was not her people's. It belonged to others, men who moved through the land with no regard for honor, men who brought fear wherever they settled for the night. He listened, silent as ever, studying the look in her eyes. They held no deceit, only dread. The warrior's gaze shifted back to the firelight. His people had lived long enough beside settlers and wanderers to know the difference between honest travelers and those who left only ashes behind. He did not yet know who waited ahead, but he knew enough to be cautious. The woman's warning only deepened the suspicion already burning in his mind. He led the horse farther from the open trail, to a thicket of mesquite where the branches grew dense. There, hidden from plain sight, he paused. The woman stood close, still dripping from the river, her white dress clinging to her shoulders in the moonlight. She shivered, and he took from his saddle a blanket of woven wool, offering it without a word. She wrapped herself tightly, her hands clutching the fabric as if it carried more than warmth. For a while, neither spoke. The night pressed close around them, heavy with silence. A coyote cried again, farther off now, but even that sound faded into the stillness. The warrior studied the woman in the glow of the moon, noting the way her face shifted when she thought no one was watching. There was sorrow there, deeper than simple fear of the men by the fire. Something in her story had not yet been spoken. At last she began to tell him more. Her words came slowly, haltingly, as if each one carried a weight too heavy to set down all at once. She spoke of her family, settlers who had come west seeking new land, building a small cabin near the river's edge. They had been there only a short while when trouble found them. A group of men, not farmers nor hunters, rode into the valley one evening. They carried rifles and cruel laughter, demanding food, supplies, and more. Her father resisted, but resistance only brought pain. The men returned again and again, each time taking more. Each time leaving behind fear. The warrior listened without interrupting, his face still and unreadable. She told him that on this very day, the men had come once more. Voices had risen, threats shouted, her father standing firm, though he knew the risk. She had fled toward the river, hoping to escape the sound of it, hoping for even a moment of peace. That was when she had slipped, the current dragging her under until the warrior found her. She did not know what had become of her family after she left. Her voice faltered then, the weight of memory too much to carry further. She lowered her head, clutching the blanket tighter. The warrior let her words settle in the silence. He knew her pain was real. He had seen such things before. The West was wide and wild, but greed had a way of narrowing it, of pressing hard against those who sought only to live quietly. His people, too, had felt that hand upon them. The firelight in the distance flickered again, reminding him that her story was not finished. Whoever those men were, they had not gone far. He could feel their presence in the land itself, like wolves circling unseen. The woman noticed the way his eyes lingered toward that glow. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, whispering that they should not go near. Her voice shook with memory, but beneath it was a plea. He nodded once, showing her he understood. But he also knew they could not remain where they were. The night was long, and the desert unforgiving. He needed to decide whether to guide her toward safety or to face whatever waited by that fire. For now, he chose patience. The desert taught him that sometimes waiting was as powerful as moving. They sat beneath the mesquite, a horse shifting quietly nearby. The woman leaned against the tree, her eyes heavy from exhaustion, though fear kept her from full rest. The warrior remained awake, his senses reaching into the dark, listening to every rustle, every change in the wind. He thought of his people, of the lessons taught by elders who spoke of balance and honor. Saving this woman had been instinct, but now that choice carried him into a path filled with unknowns. As the night deepened, clouds drifted across the moon, casting the land into shadow. The fire ahead flickered, growing dim for a moment, then brighter again, as though fed by fresh wood. Voices carried faintly across the distance, rough laughter, the kind that held no joy. The woman stirred at the sound, her face tightening. She closed her eyes, pressing herself deeper into the blanket, as though she could hide from what she knew too well. The warrior kept watching, listening. His mind traced the steps that had brought him here. The river had tested his strength, but the river was honest. It pulled, it dragged, but it gave no lies. Men, on the other hand, often hid danger behind words, behind firelight that promised warmth but delivered fear. He knew he must learn more before deciding their next move. At dawn, the first thin light of day crept across the horizon. The woman stirred awake, her face drawn and pale. She whispered that the men would not leave quickly. They camped where they pleased, taking what they wanted until nothing remained. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the last time they came, when they had taken her brother's horse and left him beaten in the dust. She said her father had sworn to stand against them, though she feared he would pay dearly for that vow. The warrior listened, his jaw tightening. He had seen fathers make such stands before, and he knew how they often ended, but he did not tell her that. Instead, he placed a hand upon the earth, feeling its steady strength beneath him. His people believed the land carried wisdom, that by grounding oneself, one could hear what must be done. He felt that wisdom now, though the path ahead remained clouded. He gave the woman water from a small pouch at his side. She drank gratefully, though her eyes drifted toward, the smoke rising faintly where the fire had burned through the night. Fear still lived in her gaze, but beneath it was something else too. Hope. She had seen him stand against the river, and some part of her now believed he could stand against what lay ahead. Yet the warrior knew hope alone was not enough. The men by the fire were not the river. They were not bound by nature's honesty. They were bound by greed, by cruelty, and those things made them far more dangerous. Still, as he watched the woman pull the blanket tighter around herself, as he saw the quiet strength in her, even through fear, he felt a weight settle on him. Saving her from the river had been an act of instinct. Protecting her now felt like a duty. The day stretched forward, carrying with it questions that could not yet be answered. What had become of her family? Who exactly were the men by that fire, and why had they chosen this place to haunt? The warrior knew he could not yet turn away. The desert had bound him to this woman. The river's current had carried them both into a story larger than either could see. As the sun rose higher, burning the mist from the land, he prepared himself for what must come. The fire had not been placed by chance. The men waiting there would not remain unseen forever. And though he had pulled life from the water, truest test still lingered ahead. The woman's eyes followed his every move, her silence heavy with questions. She did not ask what he planned, nor did he tell her. Some things could not yet be spoken. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when paths would collide. The warrior adjusted the strap across his chest, his hand brushing the handle of his weapon. He looked once more toward the smoke in the distance. Somewhere beyond that haze, shadows waited, watching, ready to shape the fate of those who dared to draw near. And so the day began. Heavy with tension, each step forward, carrying them closer to what neither of them could yet name. But both could feel in the silence of the land. The smoke rising in the distance carried a bitter smell, sharp against the morning air. The warrior watched it from the cover of the mesquite trees, his sharp eyes following the way it curled upward into the pale sky. The woman sat close by, wrapped in the wool blanket he had given her, her eyes fixed on that same smoke. Neither spoke. But the silence between them was filled with a weight that neither could ignore. The warrior had faced storms, wild animals and hostile bands before, but the silence of this morning carried a different kind of threat. The men by that fire were not strangers to violence. Their laughter, which carried faintly over the land, told him all he needed to know. They were the kind who took pleasure in power, who bent others beneath their will simply because they could. He did not yet know their full intent. But he knew well enough that the woman's fear was not misplaced. The woman shifted uneasily, as if she could feel their eyes even across the distance. She whispered to him that the men were dangerous beyond measure, that they had no mercy. Her father had once tried to stand against them, and she feared she might never see him again. Her words trembled with guilt, for she had run when they came, leaving behind those she loved. The warrior said nothing, but inside he weighed her sorrow against the choice now set before him. To protect her meant to face those men, but to face them meant stepping into a fight that might not belong to him. Yet the desert had already chosen for him. By saving her from the river, he had tied his fate to hers. The current of life had a way of pulling men where they did not plan to go, just as the river pulled the helpless toward its depths. He guided her to remain hidden in the thicket while he scouted ahead. She wanted to protest, her fear sharp in her voice, but he silenced her with a calm look. He moved with the quiet steps of one trained by the land itself, each footfall measured, every breath controlled. The brush swallowed him, leaving her alone with only the sound of the river and her own racing heart. The camp was not far, tucked into a clearing beside a stand of pines. From his vantage point among the rocks, the warrior saw them clearly now. There were 6 men, rough and hardened, their faces marked by the life of the trail. They carried rifles that leaned against logs, knives hanging at their sides. Their voices were harsh, filled with a cruel humor that made the air feel heavy. He studied the way they moved, the way they spoke, learning what he could. One man seemed to lead the rest, taller, broader, with a scar running down his cheek. His voice carried authority, though it was the kind that ruled through fear. He barked orders, and the others obeyed with quick glances, eager not to draw his anger. The warrior recognized this kind of leader, one who commanded not through respect but through intimidation. Such men were the most dangerous, for they valued nothing but their own power. Near the fire, the warrior saw something that made his jaw tighten. A wagon stood, its wheel broken, its canvas torn. Supplies lay scattered around it, some of them bearing marks of a family's hand. He could not yet see the family themselves, but he knew this wagon had not belonged to these men. It was too neatly kept, too carefully packed before it had been torn apart. The men had taken it, just as the woman had said they always did. The warrior stayed hidden, watching, memorizing. He could not strike blindly, not with the woman depending on him. He returned to her slowly, his steps careful, and found her waiting anxiously in the shade. Her eyes searched his face for answers before he even spoke. He told her only enough to confirm her fears. The wagon was there, the men too, and they were not leaving soon. Her face went pale, her hands clenching the blanket as she whispered a single word, family. She begged him to tell her if he had seen them, but he could not give her what she wanted. He had seen no sign of her father or brother, though the wagon was theirs. Her fear deepened into quiet despair. She sank to her knees, her voice breaking as she said the men must have already done what they came to do. The warrior did not answer, but in his heart he knew she might be right. Yet there was still a chance, and as long as a chance existed, he would not give in to hopelessness. The day wore on, and the sun rose higher, scorching the earth with its heat. From their hidden place, they could hear the faint shouts and laughter of the men. The woman tried to rest, but her mind would not let her. She asked the warrior questions about his people, about why he had saved her. He answered sparingly, but each word carried weight. He told her his people believed in balance, that life was sacred and must be honored. To turn away from one in need would bring shame not only to him, but to his ancestors. His words quieted her for a time, though her fear never left. She looked at him differently now, not only with gratitude, but with a faint hope that he might be strong enough to face what awaited. Yet she also knew that hope was dangerous, for it might ask more of him than he could give. As the sun began to fall once more, the warrior made another choice. He told her he would move closer to the camp when night returned, to see more, to learn what fate had met her family. Her eyes filled with worry, but she did not try to stop him. She knew some truths could not be avoided, no matter how painful. When darkness came, the land grew quiet, except for the low hum of insects and the occasional cry of a night bird. The warrior crept forward again, the shadows hiding him as he approached the camp. The fire burned bright, its glow casting long shapes across the ground. He saw them again. The men gathered close, their voices louder now with drink. The scarred leader spoke, his words carrying a dark satisfaction. He boasted of how easy it had been, how settlers always thought their small cabins could stand against rifles. The others laughed, raising their cups in cruel agreement. The warrior's blood grew hot, though his face remained still. He had his answer now. The family had resisted, and the men had answered with violence. Whether they still lived, he could not yet tell, but the leader's words left little room for hope. Then, as if fate had chosen to tighten the noose, the warrior saw something that froze him in place. Near the fire, bound to a post, was a figure. Even in the dim light, he could see it was a man, beaten and bruised, but alive. The settler's clothes marked him as kin to the woman he had saved. The warrior pulled back into the shadows, his mind racing. The woman must not know yet, not until he could plan a way to bring her kin to safety. But the sight of that man bound to the post shifted the weight of the conflict. It was no longer a question of whether he would act, but how. When he returned to her side, her eyes searched his once again, desperate for truth. He did not tell her everything, not yet, but he placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. He said only that her family was not yet lost, that she must hold on to her strength. The night deepened, carrying with it a silence heavy with what was yet to come. The warrior sat awake, his weapon close, his thoughts fixed on the campfire glow. The woman leaned against the tree beside him, her eyes wide open, unable to close against the weight of her fears. Both knew the dawn would bring choices that could not be undone, and as the fire flickered in the distance, Unseen eyes seemed to watch from the shadows, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The night stretched long, heavy with silence. The warrior did not sleep. His body was still, but his mind worked like the restless river, turning over every path that lay before him. The men at the camp were not simple wanderers who could be scared away with words. They were predators who had already tasted blood, and their laughter around the fire told him they had no fear of consequence. To face them meant stepping into danger far greater than the river's current. But to do nothing meant leaving the woman's kin to suffer a fate worse than death. The woman sat close by, her blanket drawn around her shoulders, her face pale in the dim light of the moon. She asked again what he had seen. Her voice was quiet, as if afraid to break the fragile stillness around them. The warrior chose his words carefully. He told her family still lived, but that danger surrounded them. It was enough to steady her, though he could see the storm in her eyes. She clutched the blanket tighter, whispering a prayer to no one in particular, as if the desert itself might hear. When dawn came, it brought with it no relief, only a sharper edge of fear. Smoke still rose from the camp, a black scar against the pale sky. The warrior kept them hidden, but he knew the time to act was drawing closer. Every hour that passed placed her family at greater risk. He spent the day preparing. Quietly, he studied the ground, the trails, the bends in the land. He traced the movement of the men from afar, watching how they circled the wagon, how they guarded their captive. He saw how they rested in shifts, 2 men always awake while the others dozed. He noted the placement of their rifles, the way their horses were tied close but restless. Every detail mattered, for every detail could decide life or death when the moment came. The woman watched him work, saying little, but her eyes followed every movement. She wanted to believe in him, to trust that he could do what she could not. Yet fear clung to her, fear that even his strength might not be enough against so many. Sometimes she would whisper her brother's name, her father's too, as if speaking them softly might somehow keep them alive. That evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched long across the valley, the warrior sat with her beneath the mesquite. He told her the truth in full. Her father was bound at the camp, beaten but alive. The men guarded him closely, though their cruelty left them careless at times. If he was to be saved, it must be done soon, before they tired of their game. Her eyes filled with tears at the words. But behind the sorrow came a spark of determination. She wanted to go with him, to help, but he shook his head. Her presence would only draw risk. She did not argue further, though her silence was heavy. She knew he spoke the truth, yet the thought of waiting helplessly while her family's fate was decided tore at her heart. As the last light faded, the warrior prepared. He tightened the straps of his weapon, checked the sharpness of his knife, and steadied his horse. He placed a hand briefly on the woman's shoulder, a silent promise that he would not abandon her kin. Then he slipped into the shadows, his form swallowed by the dark. The camp glowed ahead, firelight flickering against the rough faces of the men. They were louder tonight, voices carrying on the wind, sharp with drink and cruel laughter. The scarred leader sat closest to the fire, his heavy frame casting long shadows. He spoke with confidence, mocking the settler bound nearby. The man's head hung low, but he still lived. His hands were tied, his body bruised, yet there was a spark of defiance in his silence. The warrior's eyes swept the scene. He counted each man, noted each rifle, each careless gesture. He moved closer, blending with the rocks and brush, waiting for the right moment. His breath was steady, his heartbeat slow, every sense sharpened. Then something shifted. One of the men near the fire stood abruptly, his drunken laugh cut short. He turned his head, listening. The warrior froze, his body still as stone. The man squinted into the dark, muttering to the others. For a long moment, tension gripped the camp. Rifles were lifted, eyes searching the shadows. The leader barked an order, his voice low, but edged with suspicion. The warrior remained motionless, pressed against the earth, listening to their footsteps as 2 men moved away from the fire to check the dark edges of the camp. They were close, too close. One carried a lantern, its light sweeping across the ground, brushing dangerously near his hiding place. He gripped the handle of his knife, ready if he must, but the men moved past, their eyes dulled by drink. The light drifted away, and the warrior let out a breath he had held tight in his chest. He knew now that time was running thin. The men were growing restless, suspicious. If he waited too long, they would tighten their guard, and the chance would be lost. Back in the thicket, the woman waited, every moment stretching into eternity. She could see the faint glow of the fire in the distance, hear the faint echo of voices, but she could not see him. She pressed her hands together, whispering words of hope into the night. Each crack of laughter from the camp made her flinch. Each pause in the sound made her hold her breath. The warrior crept closer once more, his eyes fixed on the man tied to the post. He could see now the lines of pain on his face, the cuts, the bruises. Yet beneath it all, there was strength, the same strength he had seen in the woman's eyes. He knew they were kin not only by blood, but by spirit. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. The men had grown louder again, their suspicion dulled by drink, their attention turning inward once more. The warrior saw his chance. He moved silently, each step careful, each breath measured. He reached the edge of the clearing, his hand tightening around the handle of his weapon. Then, without warning, one of the horses tied near the wagon let out a sharp whinny, stomping its hooves against the ground. The men turned at once, their laughter silenced. Eyes swept the shadows, rifles raised. The leader barked another order, suspicion hardening his face. The warrior froze once more, his muscles tight. He was close, closer than ever. But now every eye searched the dark. The horses shifted restlessly, their instincts sensing what the men could not see. The firelight flickered, shadows twisting. The moment stretched tight as a bowstring. From the thicket, a woman clutched the blanket tight around her, her heart pounding. She saw the way the camp shifted, heard the leader's voice echo across the night. She could not see the warrior, but she felt his presence there, felt the danger pressing down on him with every heartbeat. The night was alive with tension. Every sound sharper, every silence heavier. The river whispered nearby, carrying the weight of fate in its endless current. The warrior's hand rested steady on his weapon, his eyes fixed on the scarred leader by the fire. The time for waiting was nearly over. The storm that had been building since the moment he pulled the woman from the river was about to break. The horses pawed at the earth, their restless cries filling the night. Every sound cut through the camp like a warning. The men stood tense now, rifles raised, eyes darting into the shadows. The fire burned higher, its glow sharpening every movement, every face. The scarred leader barked orders, his voice rough with suspicion. Though even he could not silence the unease that spread among his men, the warrior knew there was no more time for patience. The moment for silence had passed. He moved with the swiftness of the river, stepping from the shadows into the edge of the firelight. For a heartbeat the men froze, caught off guard by the sudden figure before them. Then came the shouts, the rush of boots, the crack of rifles splitting the night. The warrior darted low, his movements a blur. A shot split the air above him, striking sparks from stone. His knife flashed in the firelight as he struck one of the men before the rifle could be raised again. The camp erupted into chaos, firelight twisting with shouts and the cry of horses. The scarred leader roared commands. But the warrior pressed forward with relentless strength. He fought not only for himself but for the man bound at the post, for the woman waiting in fear beyond the trees, for the balance of honor his people had always upheld. One of the men lunged at him, but the warrior's strike sent him sprawling into the dirt. Another tried to fire, but the horse's sudden kick sent the rifle clattering aside. The fight was brutal, the air heavy with dust and smoke, but the warrior's focus never wavered. His eyes found the scarred leader, who stood now with rifle in hand, his face twisted in rage. The leader raised his weapon, but the warrior moved first, knocking it aside and driving him back toward the fire. They clashed in the circle of light, every strike echoing with the weight of all that had led them here. The leader was strong, hardened by years of cruelty, but the warrior carried something greater. He carried the strength of honor, of a cause larger than himself. At last the leader faltered, his weapon torn from his grip. The warrior held his blade steady, the fire reflecting in his eyes. For a moment the camp was still. The other men scattered, beaten, or fled into the dark. The scarred leader stared at him with a mix of fury and fear. Knowing the fight was lost, the warrior did not strike the final blow. Instead, he let silence fall heavy, his blade held firm but unmoving. He had shown his strength, and in that strength lay the answer. The leader stumbled back, his power broken, his men gone. The fight was over. The warrior turned at once to the post, cutting the bonds that held the woman's father. The man sagged against him, too weak to stand, but alive. His eyes, swollen from bruises, held a spark of gratitude as he whispered his thanks. The warrior lifted him gently, guiding him away from the fire and toward the trees. The woman rushed forward from the thicket, her face pale with worry. When she saw her father, alive though battered, she cried out in relief, wrapping her arms around him. The blanket slipped from her shoulders as she held him, tears falling freely. The warrior stepped back, watching quietly, letting the moment belong to them. The night was calm again, fire crackling low behind them, the voices of the men gone into the distance. The desert had swallowed the echoes of violence, leaving only the whisper of the river nearby. For a long while, they remained there, the woman tending to her father's wounds, the warrior keeping watch against the horizon. He knew some of the men might return, but without their leader's strength, they would scatter like leaves before the wind. The danger had passed, at least for now. When dawn came, it painted the land in gold once more. The woman's father, though weak, could walk with support. Together they made their way back along the river, the warrior leading his horse, the woman guiding her father step by step. The journey was slow, but the land felt lighter than it had before. The smoke was gone, the air clean again, the silence filled with the promise of renewal. At last they reached the small cabin by the river, worn but standing. The sight brought both relief and sorrow to the woman. She saw the marks of struggle, the broken door, the scattered remains of what the men had taken. Yet it was still home, and her father stood beside her, alive to see another day. The warrior helped them inside, his hands steady as he lifted the wounded man onto a bed of furs. The woman began to gather what little remained, her face marked by both determination and grief. She knew rebuilding would not be easy. But she also knew they had been given another chance. Her eyes turned off into the warrior, silent questions resting there. Why had he helped them when he owed them nothing? Why had he risked his life for people not of his own? He gave her no speech, no long explanation. He only said that life was sacred, that to turn away from those in need would have brought shame upon his spirit. His words lingered with her. In them she saw not only the strength of a man, but the wisdom of a people who lived in balance with the land. She felt something stir within her, a deeper understanding of the world than she had ever known. As the sun climbed higher, the warrior prepared to leave. His place was not within the cabin walls, but out on the open land. He tightened the straps of his horse, adjusted his gear, and stood ready to ride. The woman came to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She tried to find words to thank him, but they felt too small for what he had done. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on his arm, her silence saying more than words could. He met her gaze, gave a single nod, and then mounted his horse. Her father, still weak but watching from the doorway, raised a hand in quiet respect. The warrior returned it with a small gesture before turning toward the horizon. The horse carried him steadily along the river's edge, the land wide and endless before him. Behind him, the cabin stood, a place of survival and memory. Ahead, the desert stretched open, filled with both danger and promise. The woman stood long at the doorway, watching until he was only a shadow against the light. She felt both sorrow and peace, knowing their paths had crossed for a reason, knowing she would never forget the warrior who had risen from the river's edge to save not only her but the family she loved. The river itself moved on, carrying with it the memory of that night. It whispered through the land, as it always had. Bearing witness to the strength of those who dared to fight its pull, the warrior rode forward, the horizon calling him, his spirit unshaken. He had faced the current of the river, the cruelty of men, and the weight of fate. And through it all, he had remained true to the honor of his people, for those he left behind. His memory would live as more than a rescuer. He had become a symbol of courage, of balance, of the truth that strength was not only in the arm, but in the heart. And so the story of the Apache warrior and the woman by the river came to its end. Not in despair, but in renewal. A tale carried on the desert wind, told by the river's song, remembered by those who had seen how one act of courage could change the path of many lives. Top of form, bottom of form.